Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? So, hello everyone. Welcome to Ask the Grant Writing Expert. I'm Dr. Meg Bouvier. You know me as the creator of your library of NIH grantsmanship courses. I have over 35 years of experience at NIH as an applicant, an intramural researcher, a staff writer, and now as a full-time NIH grant mentor. I've helped clients land over $500 million in federal funding, and I'm here to answer your NIH grant writing questions. So grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. So if you are attending live, just a reminder that you are in listen only mode. If you look down at the toolbar on your the platform, you'll see that there's a Q&A box. You can put questions in there at any time. You could start typing those in now if you like. And there's a chat if you want to share any thoughts. We'll be sharing information there as well. And if you are watching this as a recording, and more people are doing that, a disclaimer that today is March 5th, 2025, and everything that we're talking about today is true to the best of our knowledge as of today. But you should always check with NIH to, whenever possible, to make sure that the information is still accurate. So what you should be viewing in the library now, well, given that it's early March, I would think that a lot of you are prepping for applications to the June and July deadline. So we just wrapped up our 4-part Master the R Series bootcamp. So I would imagine a lot of you are still working your way through the checklist of Master the R Series chapters 1 and 2. And the other thing is that we just updated 2 courses. So one is Checklist to Avoid Top Mistakes, and that should be live. That update should be live on your dashboard. And the other one is Grow a Healthy Funding Portfolio. And that update, today is March 5th. I think that update goes live on the 10th. So just be aware of that information. And of course, the live stream, the recording of the live stream bootcamp is up as well. Let's see. This is the 5th. So on Friday, March 7th, we'll be doing our First Fridays, which is our virtual office hours. And Riley will put a sign-up link in the chat for First Fridays. If you're not registered for that, feel free to come by. It's literally just virtual office hours. You can come and go as you want. You can lurk. You can ask questions. You can drop in and ask your question and then leave. Whatever works for you, but feel free to come by and ask your questions. In terms of NIH updates, the continuing resolution, which is the temporary funding bill, runs out on the 14th. I think we are likely to head into a government shutdown at that point. Some people are predicting it will be a fairly lengthy one. Typically, they're a few days or a week. Some lobbyists are predicting that it may go longer than that, multiple weeks, up to a month, maybe longer. And, things remain uncertain. It's unclear if there's going to be, or not if, but how much of a funding cut will there be. NIH is, like all agencies, is in line for a pretty hefty funding cut. And the big question that remains is about the suggestion of reducing the negotiated indirect rate to be capped at 15%. So this has created a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear. My next Ask the Grant Writing Expert on March 19th. Initially, I was going to speak about private foundation funding because I just updated that course and it seemed like a good topic to talk about. And then as the changes began to take place or be suggested for NIH, it took on new significance and now it's become even broader yet. So that's going to be a 30 to 60 minute session. It's going to be open to the public, and the topic is going to be strategic funding adapting to the changing NIH landscape. So I'm going to be talking about what my recommendations are for individual applicants and for universities, RD offices going forward. Of course, it's going to depend on the type of organization you're at, and there'll have to be decisions made at a level above all of our pay grades. But just, in the meantime, what do you as an applicant do to weather this storm and to make sure that your research program remains afloat? So Okay, and so today we are going to talk a little bit about I have a live Ames page edit. So I am going to close up some of these other windows I have open and share my screen. Okay, so you should be seeing a draft Ames page. So this was sent to me by a client who has a membership. And this person graciously is allowing me to edit this. And we build this as a live Ames page edit, but of course I've actually edited the document already because I wanted to okay the edits with the person who sent me the Ames page and make sure it was anonymized, and redacted to their comfort level. So really what I'm trying to do is recreate an edit for you and to give you a sense of what it looks like when I, as a grant editor, get an Ames page and how I begin and what I look for and things like that. So this is a real Ames page from a real member who is applying, or actually, I think this application already went in. And it is anonymized. So you'll see there are like rows of X's here and there that I've just redacted the names of certain things. Okay, so let's dive in. So the first thing that I typically do when I get an Ames page is just kind of like take a look at what does the overall structure of the Ames page look like. So I can see that there's not a lot of white space. They've made good use of the space that's here. And just to zoom in again, I always kind of come up here and check that it's a recommended font. This is Arial 11 point. I usually check the spacing. So it looks like they did 0.3 line spacing before the paragraphs. And I look at the margins to make sure that they're half-inch margins and not smaller than that. They can be larger than that. That is allowed, but that's not a great use of space. So this is within spec. So the first things I do are just kind of eyeball the whole thing to make sure that the structure of it looks right, to see where I am in terms of am I going to have to add text, cut text, where are we, and to make sure they're within spec. So that those are always the first things. So the other thing is I've noticed a real trend lately to put the title on the Ames page. I'm not a fan. I'm going to cut that, and typically what I do is either move that to the bottom or to a comment box here. I'm just cutting it out. Why am I not a fan of that? Because you don't need it. It's uploaded into a PDF where the title is readily available to the reviewer, and it takes up precious space on the Ames page. Like one line is a lot of space on an Ames page. So technically, you don't even have to label this as a specific Ames. Some people will write specific Ames here or at the top or on the side and take up a whole line. Technically, you don't even need to do that, because if you've ever seen what an uploaded draft of an application looks like, it's a PDF with multiple tabs, and this is within the Ames page tab. So it's readily apparent to the reviewer what section they're looking at, and the title is readily available to them as well. The next thing I'm going to do, and this is my personal preference, this isn't an NIH thing, although I will say I know a lot of reviewers who agree with me. I find it excruciating to edit a document that is justified to both the left and the right margin, which yields this kind of odd spacing between words. Word is rather inelegant. It's not like a publishing company where when things are justified to the left and right margin, they can kind of eliminate that kind of odd spacing between words and play around with it. Word is rather inelegant in how it deals with that. And I personally find that justifying to both the left and the right margin and having that odd spacing between words causes a lot of eye strain, and it actually gives me a headache. It actually gives me migraines. I can't edit documents that are in that format. So even if the applicant decides later on to change it back while I'm editing it, I always justify it to the left margin. It's just my personal preference. I do know a lot of reviewers who agree with me, however. And it probably doesn't bother you guys too much, but those of us who are reading 10, 12, or in my case, more like 20 or 25 of these in a short period of time. Fatigue is a thing, and eye strain is a thing. So that's my personal preference. So the next thing I look at is how space is apportioned. So it looks to me like they have dedicated about half the page, a little less than half the page, to the narrative overview. And then they have a short paragraph under the aims, and then it looks like some sort of an impact statement here in italics. So let's zoom in again and take a look at this narrative overview. And I'm just going to read this for a moment. And the other thing I'm noticing right off the bat is that there are a lot of acronyms. You see how there are, if you just kind of scan this, there are a lot of acronyms. My personal preference in a situation like that is to do something like this, where these become bolded blue. It just makes them easier to quickly skim and refer back to. And this is an edit that I would probably carry through to the research strategy, either by doing this same thing where I just, bold and make them blue, or I would include a text box in the top left corner of the research strategy where the significance section is. I'll include a little text box where I alphabetically list the acronyms and then define them right after that. Both of these strategies are, I find, really good ways to allow a reviewer to quickly look back and find the definition of an acronym they might be seeking as they're reading. I typically opt for this strategy in the research strategy, when this formatting strategy, when there aren't too many acronyms. And if there are, maybe 8 or 10 or more, I would use an acronym box at the beginning of the research strategy. Okay, and I'm going to pause because it looks like there's a question. Let me just move the Q&A box. You described the PDF document that an NIH reviewer receives from an applicant's documents. Can we find a reviewer's complete sample application PDF file somewhere so we know what an NIH reviewer sees? Ooh, that's a good question. I know that you can look at the entire uploaded document. If you look at the samples on the NIH website, they'll show you the entire document, but it's not displayed the same way it is for reviewers, I don't believe. It's usually a lengthy document that has everything just running one after another, after another, after another, after another. So there's a hyperlink table of contents, and you could choose like the human subjects form, the bio sketches, the research strategy, the aims page, that kind of thing. Yeah, and this person saying we need to see what the reviewers see. Yeah, and I can't remember how I learned about this. Why did I ever see this? I must have had a client who showed it to me. And if there's anybody on the call, let me just quickly look. But if there's anybody on the call who is a reviewer, if you could verify that this is still true, let me just quickly scan through here and see if I know anybody who's a reviewer on here. No, I am not seeing any of my clients who are reviewers on here. But yeah, typically it's displayed like any PDF that has multiple tabs, where the tabs are on the left of the PDF, and you could just click over, or however it's displayed. I guess it could be at the bottom too, but you just click over to, like this tab says aims page, this tab says human subjects form, this tab says bio sketches, and they can navigate back and forth within the tab. I think that is still true. But I don't know where you can see that. I probably was shown that either by an NIH colleague or a client who was a reviewer at some point. And I'm kind of assuming that's still true. So you're welcome. Okay, so let's take a look at the content of this. So what I'm not loving is that this is 3 paragraphs that, other than the blue that I just put in there, is entirely unformatted. So this is not terribly conducive to skimming. So remember that let's say you have 30 people on your study section, 3 of them will have been assigned this application as they're assigned reviewers. So they will have seen it ahead of time. They will have read it. But of course, they're skimming at the study section meeting to jog their memory, because they will have read many other applications besides yours. all the other reviewers who are not assigned but have an equal vote to your assigned reviewers will not have read this ahead of time. And they're skimming while people are talking at them, so this is not conducive to skimming. You, the writer, are not in control of where the reviewer's skimming eyes land. So let's take a look at this and see what we can do to figure this out. So I'm going to read the sentences in the first paragraph silently, and I'll encourage you to do the same. So I think what I'm going to do is combine these two paragraphs and label this clinical problem. And depending on the formatting, I may opt to underline that or not. But for now, let's leave it. And let's just skim this and see if this hangs together in terms of describing the clinical problem. The other thing is that usually if there's a disease involved, I either bold or highlight or color that just so that a skimming reviewer can immediately see what disease we're talking about. And then the other thing I would probably do is underline the word critical gaps here just to direct their attention to that. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. Let me make sure that, I guess the other thing that I did was, it looks like in my original edit, I bolded this syndrome name. And this is it. I did this edit on the original version that had all the names in it. So I'm just trying to figure out where I am. But I think this hangs together as a nice short paragraph that describes the clinical problem. I think it does an effective job of that. As a non-subject matter expert, this looks okay to me. And I've provided a little bit of formatting, judicious formatting. This is the syndrome. Here are the critical gaps that I'm going to describe. Then I'm going to justify this to the left margin. I do find it easier to skim when things are justified to the left margin rather than indenting. So it looks like here in this second paragraph, he's transitioning to talking about their work. We developed, to our knowledge, the first human cortical, and I might underline that. I actually didn't do that on my initial edit, but I might underline that. The first, because this is kind of speaks to innovation. Okay, let me continue to skim. Yeah. So this is all looking like preliminary data, and I'm going to label it as such. Okay, this whole thing is preliminary data. And this is where the person transitions to talking about their project. So this could either be its own paragraph, in which case I would do proposed project. That's probably, and again, I didn't do this on my original edit because we're tight on space. But in an ideal world, this is how I would set it up. So it would be the clinical problem here, preliminary data here, and proposed project. And I would say to further advance this work in the study, we propose to, and then I would give a one sentence statement about what you propose to do. I would probably also say what the project, hypothesis is, and I would probably say the methods, like generalized methods, and I would probably underline these project hypothesis and the methods, just so that there's kind of a transition. This is going to be tight on space, I will say. So as you come down here, you can see we're now over a little bit in these lines. So this could be moved back up here. And then what you could do is underline we propose instead and do it like that and just tack it on to the preliminary data section. But in an ideal world, I really like to have this be sorry, proposed project. I really like to have this be its own paragraph, short paragraph. So, and we'll see what we can do about the space after. Okay, so that's a typical layout that I find easier to skim. We've broken it into the clinical problem, so the reviewers immediately know they can skim in here for background information. This is the syndrome. Here are the gaps. Here's a discussion of the preliminary data. The innovation is that they developed a novel organoid model. You could also underline something like that if you wanted. You don't have to do the whole sentence, just give them enough to act as a signpost so that they know where to go for more information. Okay, so let's shift gears and come on down to the aims. Again, I would typically move these to the left margin. And this is a minor thing, but typically people include a little space there. I will say that sometimes people will put like specific aim one. That's done. That's a thing that people will know what that means. So you could do that too. I am not a fan of italics, and there's a lot of italics in this. You'll see italics here, 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 and then the entire impact statement is italicized. This is particularly brutal on tired eyes. This, for me, again, causes a huge amount of eye strain. To read that much text in italics really bothers me. So I'm taking that out. Of course, this is like my personal preference territory. It's not, this isn't an NIH thing. It's just my preference. But again, I will say that some of my reviewers say the same things, that this bothers them as well. All right, and let me check my list of things to make sure that I haven't neglected any edits up to this point. Hold on a second. Yeah, got that so far. Just making sure I didn't miss anything. And there were copy edits in there too that I made, but I'm not going to sit and read through this and do some simple copy edits in terms of grammar and that kind of thing at this point. I want to just give you an idea of structure, skimmability, that kind of thing. So, okay, just looking at parallel construction, define, assess, and mapping. So let's remove the gerund here and just make that map. Okay, and there's another acronym here that I'm going to make bold and blue. Okay, let's just skim this first aim. I'm not a huge fan of the passive voice here. I tend to use active voice. Proliferation assays will evaluate. I would change that to we will evaluate RGC proliferation, et cetera, with proliferation assays, or we will use proliferation assays to evaluate RGC, et cetera. I find it much more readable, and there is a move in general away from passive voice. The Plain Language Initiative at the federal level talks a lot about using active voice. And for those of you who are concerned about it, not once I've probably read thousands of summary statements over the last like 30 years. Not once have I ever heard a reviewer complain about the use of the active voice. And for those of us who read stacks of these, active voice is just so much easier and more palatable to deal with. So, okay, so there's nothing under here but method, which is absolutely 100% okay. But if you had something other, let's say you had a hypothesis, you could do something like that and format it like this, and then shift gears and then put methods. And then sometimes people will have background information. Sometimes they'll have a deliverable. Sometimes they'll have an impact statement at the end of each aim. It's really up to you. All of these things, again, are meant to provide signposts to skimming reviewers. The AIMS page it's hugely important that the information is easy to grasp. You don't have to have a hypothesis with every AIM, but if you don't, you should have a project hypothesis, an overarching project hypothesis, unless it's a methods development grant. It's the one time where reviewers won't complain that there isn't a project hypothesis. Okay, let's move down to AIM 2, and we'll skim this. This is another acronym here. So here's a place where we could put, this is like almost like background information here, background or rationale. And we could say underline preliminary data here. And here's where they shift to talking about the methods right there. Let's see. Yeah, and the rest of it is methodology. So you could do something like that. And you don't necessarily have to have the identical subheaders from one AIM to the next. It's nice if that works out, and try not to have them be wildly different from each other, because that can be a little confusing to a skimming reviewer. Yes, it's an R01 application. Sorry, I should have said that. This is for an R01. And it was for, I want to say it was for an RFA, if I remember correctly. This was not for the parent R01, it was for a specific RFA. I believe that was the case. Okay, then moving on to AIM 3. We'll just skim this quickly. So again, I would probably, just take the formatting off. I would probably call this background or rationale. Or if this was their data, I would say preliminary data. And this is where they shift to talking about the methodology that they will use in the proposed project. And again, I would use active voice here. We will use in vivo studies to assess long-term rescue. Okay, and here is where they shift to the impact statement. And I would definitely label that as an impact statement. And this is successful completion of this proposal would result in funding. So what you want to say here is successful completion of this project. Or better yet, you could just say results. Because that's shorter. Will advance our understanding of the Yeah. Beautiful. This is a beautiful impact statement. Okay, so it's 2 lines over, but you can see that we've made it a little easier. Here, let me zoom out again. So we've made it a little easier to reduce the space between sections, because we have these left margin justified bolded headers. So let's try changing it to point to 2 point, and that gets us down to 1 page. So the other thing you can do here, you could capitalize these. That's an option, just to like make them a little more prominent. If you're looking for a way to kind of really emphasize these headers, you do the same here with proposed project, with like the AIM. I wouldn't do the entire AIM, but you could do the word AIM and do that for each of the AIMs, and then again for impact. And that would make a visually appealing way. The other thing you could do is insert a bullet. You do something like that. I'm not a big fan of the auto indent for bullets. I tend to just manually indent them, because again, I like everything justified to the left margin. So that's another way to create kind of a clear visual indication of where those headers are. Sometimes I underline these, but because I used underlining for emphasis within the text, I'm not going to do that. I think I'd rather do it this way. So I've kind of made a mess of this now because I've experimented with different, this is caps, that's not, this is bulleted, that's not, this is essay one, this is not. But, I hope that this gives you some idea of like, this isn't dealing so much with is the scope of the aims appropriate. That would be something for a subject matter expert. So as an outside reader, it's not something I can typically help with unless it looks really obviously out of scope to me. But like, does this read like a typical R01 specific aims page? Yes, it does. Like this, it's got three aims. The scope of these sound about right. Even though I'm not a subject matter expert, this sounds about right. They've apportioned space properly. They give the context for the clinical problem. They provide the preliminary data, which gives the rationale. They talk a little bit about the innovation. I've put a placeholder in there for them to talk a little bit more about the proposed project. They give enough detail under the methods of each aim. They have a really juicy, beautifully written impact statement that is understandable to me as an outside reader. So yeah, so I hope that this is helpful to you in looking at this to give you a sense of how you might do. And to be fair, the initial version was in good shape, right? Like I've gotten drafts that are in nowhere near as good a shape as this, but because this one is in good shape, I can do a quick edit that I can get done. Like we're already out of time just doing that edit. So I'm going to stay on and answer some questions. And I guess I'm going to leave that up just so people can look at it if that's helpful, but I'll stay on to answer some questions. If we list a hypothesis under each aim, should we underline or italicize? I prefer to just treat it like the other subheaders under the aim and underline it, so like hypothesis one would be here, just underline that. Some people do italicize either the word hypothesis one or the entire hypothesis. I don't like to do entire sentences formatted on an aims page. It gets busy really quickly. And again, I have a personal preference not to italicize a lot in especially full sentences because for me personally it causes eye strain. So I'm not a huge fan of that. But on an aims page, which is a single page, you really have to be judicious in your formatting. So I'm not a huge, the only entire sentence that I typically format it on an aims page is the aim itself. I will bold that. But like I don't typically bold the entire hypothesis. I usually just bold or underline the word hypothesis. And do give them a unique identifier. So like for aim 2, it would be hypothesis 2 or 2A and 2B or 2.1 and 2.2. Giving things unique identifiers makes it easier for people to discuss it because remember that your application is being discussed. People are skimming it while being talked at, and they're trying to talk to their colleagues about, direct their attention to something. So if you just say hypothesis, 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 and the reviewer says to another reviewer, I have a problem with this hypothesis. Well, there are at least 3 things on the page called hypothesis, potentially more if you have a project hypothesis and sub-hypotheses. So give them unique identifiers because it's easier to discuss. Okay, I'm still trying to understand how the aims should be related to each other. Well, you and everybody else, it's not an easy concept. For example, the 3 aims can be independent versus aim 1 and aim 2, somehow building towards aim 3, but making sure aim 3 is not dependent on aims 1 and 2. Yeah, that is really, really, really challenging. And to be fair, let me zoom in so people can read these aims. To be fair, I know that everybody says your aims should be dependent but able to stand alone when possible. I will say that many, if not most, of the applications I look at have at least one aim that is dependent. It's almost impossible to create a project like, okay, let me give you an example. I've seen projects where they do secondary data analyses and they're querying the data set on 3 different aspects. And the 3 aims can be conducted in parallel. They're just like three separate questions, three separate types of queries pertaining to a given data set. So it's the same data set, and maybe the aims are related because they all deal with a specific disease or a subset of people who have something. So there's an example where you would have three aims that are related but able to stand alone when possible. But the reality is, many, if not most, R01 projects have at least one aim that is dependent. In my experience, that tends to be the case. And the trick there, as I've always said, is to try to convince the reviewers of the feasibility of the contingent of the success of the aim that is going to lead to a subsequent aim. So if aim 3 is contingent on success on aim 2, you got to knock yourself out explaining how highly feasible aim 2 is, and really carefully write the potential problems and alternatives section for aim 2. That's the best you can do in that scenario. But you're right, it is a problem. It's an ongoing problem. It's really hard for most projects to be structured that way. So if you're still trying to understand it, you and everybody else, including me, it's not easy to figure out how to do it. Okay, what would the rationales for each aim hypothesis better to briefly describe in the aims page or solely describe in the research strategy sessions? That's a really good question too. So I think it would be really good to include some high-level rationale on the aims page itself. You don't have to get into the weeds of it. So often the rationale will actually be contained in the preliminary data section. So here they gave a detailed write-up of the preliminary data and what the findings showed, which led to the proposed project. Like often your preliminary data or your clinical problem will, or both, will end in a critical gap, some kind of knowledge gap that will logically lead to the proposed project and how you're going to fill that gap. So sometimes the rationale is really kind of built into your preliminary data. Sometimes it's actually written into the aims description, but on the aims page, it has to be really high level, typically. Here, the person made a decision. They made an editorial decision to devote a lot of space to preliminary data. Not all applicants do this. Sometimes preliminary data is 1 or 2 sentences. Here, they really dug into the preliminary data, and the rationale is kind of implicit in it. So they set the stage for the rationale for the project. Having said that, you should always include detailed rationale in the research strategy, and that can be in a variety of places or multiple places. You could discuss it in the significance. You could discuss it in the beginning of the approach as it pertains to the whole project, or you could contain it at the beginning of each aim. So many people will, like in the approach section, list the aim and then have a short paragraph that describes the rationale. So typically you do it in more than one of these places. You have to have some rationale on the aims page. It's got to be high level, and it's usually implicit somewhere in like the preliminary data section or the background section, for example. I hope that answers the question. It is interesting definition is aim 1 and okay for R. I wonder if a scoping review can be an aim. It is interesting definition is aim 1 and okay for R01. I think there's a typo in here. I wonder if a scoping review can be an aim. I'm going to say no. Unless it's like not a literature review. I don't think I've ever seen that where somebody has some sort of a scoping. I think this is what you're asking, like a scoping literature review be an aim. I have not seen that happen. I have seen people do like a query of REDCap as part of the project design, as part of an aim to figure out, like retrospectively, we're going to look at these data in REDCap to build a machine learning model that predicts XYZ, and then we will apply it prospectively and see if it holds water. I have seen that kind of thing, but not like a lit review type thing. Let's see. What are ways we can communicate feasibility of the entire grant or success of proof of concept? Preliminary data, preliminary data, preliminary data, preliminary data, preliminary data. On an R01, that is the best demonstration of feasibility and success on past R01s. But of course, for some of you, that's not going to be something you can do at the moment. So if you can, the more data you can provide, the better. Like the saying is that reviewers have an insatiable appetite for preliminary data. There's no better way to demonstrate feasibility than with preliminary data. So if it's like methodological feasibility, if you could point to other published projects where you did that methodology, or like if it's, yeah, like even if it's like using this method or this strategy for recruitment or whatever, if you can point to another published project where at least some members of your team had success with that method, that would be superb. But usually it's preliminary data and success on previous grants. But yeah, for most of you, it's going to be preliminary data. What's the difference between rationale and significance? Okay, rationale is a subheader under significance, I would say. So you could go take a look at the instructions for significance for an R01, but it's broader than rationale. Rationale is kind of built into the significance. So significance is, it would include things like how your project might address a clinical research gap, or how it might address the needs of patients. So implicit in that is the rationale, but significance feels broader to me than the rationale. So, but I would take a look at the instructions for the significance and the myriad things: rigor of prior research, clinical significance, all the how your results would advance the field and potentiate the work of others in and outside the field. It feels more broad than rationale, but certainly rationale is built into the idea of significance. I would say that that is true. I've seen a systematic review as part of an aim. Okay, but I've never seen a systematic review as an entire aim. Okay, I think I've answered all these questions. Let me just take a quick look. Yeah, I think so. And we are way over time. So, okay, I hope that was helpful to people. So I will say that the the Ames page edit is open to anybody who wants one. I'm happy to do this or any other section that I could reasonably edit within the time of a live stream. Ask the grant writing expert. Oh, good. Okay, somebody's saying yes, this was very helpful. So it gives you an idea of like just kind of a high level edit that I might do on a names page and the kinds of things that I might be looking for, what works, what doesn't work, the different types of strategies one might use for putting something like this together. If anybody wants a names page edit like this, I'm happy to do this on the live stream. As I said, I do the edit ahead of time so that you can sign off on it and sign off on the ways that we've anonymized and redacted key pieces of information so that you can feel comfortable in what's going to go up on the live stream before it happens. So if anybody wants that, just email me, meg@bouviergrant.com. I'm happy to do an Ames page or something else. You want me to edit your team table? You want me to edit your scientific rigor section? You know, like whatever it might be, as long as it's something that I could reasonably get through in a 30-minute live stream. Like this is an Ames page, we're 15 minutes over already. So you know, like that's open to whomever might like it. And I hope to see some of you on Friday at the First Fridays virtual office hours. Again, the sign up link is in the chat if that's something that interests people. This Thursday, tomorrow, I'm doing a master resubmissions boot camp. So if anybody wants to sign up for that, Riley's going to drop that link in the chat right now. That Riley, that's the registration for master resubmissions boot camp. Can you please resend the link for the office hours? It should be in the chat. Let me just open the chat and make sure that that's true now that I've said that. Let's see, I have too many windows open. Let's close these. Yep. The first, it can people see the in the chat? It's to everybody. There's a First Fridays registration link in the chat. And Riley, if you're still on the call, she may have had to hop off because we're so darned late here. If anybody would like to register for master resubmissions for tomorrow, just send me an email, and I'll get you hooked up with a registration. So just email me at meg@bouviergrant.com, and I'll send you the link for master resubmissions boot camp for tomorrow. But the first Friday's office hours on this Friday, the link is in the chat. And then again on March 19th, I'll be presenting on, let's see if I can pull up the title we came up with. We just wrote the title today. It is Strategic Funding Adapting to the Changing NIH Landscape, and I'll have a blog post to accompany that. So I'll be talking about what I'm suggesting to my clients about how to get through this period of uncertainty at the moment. What are some ways and what strategies people might use to survive it? So anyway, this was a long one. Sorry we ran so over time. And I thank everybody for coming. Really appreciate your support. You asked great questions today. Hope to see some of you tomorrow or Friday or in 2 weeks at that AGE. And as the French would say, courage. Hang in there, and I'll see you next time. Good luck, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.